questions, just go ahead and type it in the chat box, and Robin or me or somebody over here will be monitoring that, and we'll make sure that all the questions get answered. And then at the end, we'll open it up and we can all talk and ask questions that way too. So today is the second in our First Impressions program series, and this one I'm excited about. The first one we talked about just kind of the basic nuts and bolts of the program and how it works, but today we're going to talk about how it's been adapted to other places and other specific topics that are relative, important for the communities that we're working with. So let's see. Can you go? Yeah, thank you. So our presenters today are going to be Laura Brown at University of Connecticut Extension, Doug Arbogast and Robin Frost here at West Virginia University, and we've got Cynthia Messer also from University of Minnesota. We're here at WVU. I know we've been impressed with the work that's come out of there. We've adapted a lot of that for our work here, so we're excited to have her on the line as well. Kind of today's agenda, we're going to be talking about tourism specifically, and then also just small towns in general, and then again we'll have a discussion and questions and answers there at the end. And just a reminder that our upcoming webinars in the series are some additional adaptations specifically focused on youth and millennials, and then specific places, so urban neighborhoods, and we're going to have Myra Moss from Ohio State to talk about the Main Street First Impressions as well. And then in August, we're going to be talking about the evaluation piece. We've got our evaluation specialist here to talk about some of the things that she thinks we can use for our meta evaluation, and I think it's going to be good. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Doug and let our presenters kick it off.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Doug Arbogast, and I work here in CRED at WVU Extension, and I am the tourism specialist, so I'm going to talk for a little while about our adaptations of First Impressions, specifically for tourism. I want to mention, so we've had two applications of this, one at a destination level and one at more of a tourism facility level. So I'll talk about how we've customized this program for both of those applications. But actually I've traced this back to the early 1990s when Wisconsin has applied First Impressions to state parks, heritage tourism, and resorts. And there's some information in our resources list about what they've done to apply in those perspectives. Also know that Ohio State, and I think Myra will talk about their application to tourism byways. So there are some other tourism applications. Also, Cynthia is going to talk about what Minnesota has done from the tourism perspective. When I started here 3 years ago, one of the first programs that I looked at was First Impressions. And we talked about the purpose and the mission of this program last time, but I think a rapid assessment to identify strengths and weaknesses, and I really think this program ultimately brings in outside visitors. So from the tourism perspective, it just makes a lot of sense. Our community program is kind of a one-day quick walkthrough of the community, so we wanted to look at ways we could expand upon that, lengthen the stay if necessary, and kind of put yourself in the position of a typical tourist to a community. So that's what we've done, and again, our goal, just as it is with the communities, is to create a level of awareness through this rapid assessment protocol, and ultimately engage the community in a dialogue that'll lead to community action. So that's where we try to end with the program. Specifically here in West Virginia, we've designed this to not really just be a one-off, but to allow us to start and engage in communities in an overall level of community-based tourism development support. And I'll talk a little bit about how that's allowed us to engage in other programs. And I know that Cynthia will talk about their tourism assessment program that they've incorporated First Impressions into. So that is one of our goals. We are still kind of new at this from the tourism perspective, and so we're going to talk about our pilots, which were in 2 communities with our destination level program, and then with a specific facility at a county park in 2013. One recent adaptation has been with our Main Street Conference. We have kind of a unique precursor to Main Street here in West Virginia with our On Track program that gets communities ready for Main Street. And so what we've been able to do is take about 30 to 40 attendees to the conference and take them through first impressions, kind of facilitate that as a component of their conference experience. So that's been kind of a unique way that we've been able to use the program recently. We do also have a Fairs and Festivals version that's been utilized at county festivals. I have not personally had experience with that. I know that some other folks here do, so I'm not going to talk about how we've used that. So real quickly, the process works very similar to what we do with communities, but there are a couple of unique differences that I want to mention. First of all, it's very similar where we're engaging the community, so we have to identify the community leaders that we're going to be working with, and whether they contact us or we contact them, it's a process of engagement, identifying their needs, understanding what specifically we're going to be assessing, what their needs are, and an initial conversation of what their challenges are. And so that leads into the scope of the assessment. And anyone who's worked with tourism destinations knows that conducting a comprehensive assessment can be very costly and very challenging to do effectively. So that's one of the challenges with this version of the program is the actual scope of the assessment, determining what that is and what you're able to accomplish with limited time and limited funds. Obviously, the costs can vary depending on how long you're going to stay, what you're going to cover, what you're going to do. So that's something that has to be determined. Where are those funds going to come from? Is it going to be a fee that the destination organization pays, or is there potentially grant funds to cover those expenses? And then obviously you need an assessment team, and that's where this version has differed a little bit from the community version, where we've had typically faculty here at WVU that have done the assessments. Now with this conference that we've worked with, we have been able to work with some Main Street directors and others where it's more of a peer-to-peer exchange. But I'll talk a little bit about the challenges in doing that as well. Then you introduce the assessors to the manual, obviously conduct the visit, and then we'll talk about how we've compiled the reports and presented those to the destinations. Our destination manual, we've drawn from the Destination Competitiveness and Sustainability Model developed by Ritchie and Crouch. So looking at both the comparative advantage through their resources and then how they're deploying those. So I just want to give them some credit in how we've developed and implemented our destination level manual. So real quickly, these are the different sections of our manual. These are posted on our webinar resource page if you want to look more thoroughly at the manuals and the different sections that we've incorporated. So the parts that I've highlighted in red are the differences in the different categories that we've looked at in regards to a destination or a facility. So obviously when you're in a facility, you have more time to look specifically at things like their facilities, their level of hospitality, if they're providing food and beverage, things that might be unique to that attraction, whether it's a resort or a park or something of that nature, maybe a state park. At the destination level, given the amount of time, looking at the linkages between assets, looking at some of the management categories, the variety of attributes and how they're performing. So it's not as detailed of an assessment, more of a general overarching assessment of the destination. So that's why we have developed those different categories there. And as I mentioned, you can look more thoroughly through the manuals when you have more time. We have taken the time to put these manuals into Qualtrics. So we have both the print manuals that are used by the assessment team when they're in the destination, And then we have experimented with asking them to input the information into Qualtrics. But what it comes down to a lot of times is actually us or utilizing some students to then take the information sometimes and put that into Qualtrics and use that version of the manual. So we've experimented a little bit with both of those formats. And this is just an example of our manual in booklet format, which is a little bit easier for the folks in the destination when they're out and about to write things down. Sometimes they'll just use a notebook to record their observations, but we found that trying to get this into a booklet format has worked pretty well also. So some of the unique challenges with the tourism version are getting the assessors prepped and ready, getting them to understand what's in the manual and why we've developed it this way, what are some indicators of sustainable tourism development, how to be in the community and not be conspicuous that you're an outside visitor, and basically just how to understand how to use the manual and what we're looking at from the report. Taking photographs is a big part of the tourism assessment, so being out there and recording this both in writing and taking as many photographs as possible. Easier to do when we're working with university faculty that are familiar with the program, a little more challenging to do with folks that are in the community that might be engaging on a peer-to-peer basis. Now I'm going to let Robin talk a little bit about some manual updates and additions that we've incorporated more specifically into the tourism component than into the community. So she's going to talk for a few minutes about that.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Robin Frost, and I am the program coordinator for the Community Resources and Economic Development Unit here at WVU Extension Service. I just love to say that name and watch people's eyes glaze over. But most of you know what that means. So like Doug said, we have made some changes to the tourism manual and hope to make some changes to the other manuals soon here in the future. The situation that we found was that since the original manual had been developed in the early 90s, a lot of things have changed in the way of how we plan our trips. So today's traveler is a lot more tech savvy. We do a lot more online research ahead of a trip to make sure we get to our destination, to make sure we have fun things to do when we get to our destinations, etc. So we found that some additions were necessary to bring that process up to date and really more fully evaluate that complete visitor experience, whether it's to a community or a tourism destination or to a facility. So I don't think that these numbers will surprise anybody, but the facts are, based on this report, the State of the American Traveler, that travelers report 86% of their planning is done on a computer or a smartphone or a tablet before they head out on a trip. Along those same lines, about 74% of their planning is done on one of those devices actually during their trip. So we wanted to take these numbers into consideration when we were making changes to our manual and make sure that we were considering the different ways that people are planning their trips. So what we did was, in our manual, we did have originally a pre-visit assessment portion, but we have enhanced it to be able to evaluate that online experience. Specifically, we looked at a few different studies and found that this one, noted at the bottom of your screen, was the most useful in deciding what parts of an online experience to evaluate. And of course, you can see those listed there as accessibility, speed, navigability, content, and visual appeal. So accessibility, just to clarify between navigability and accessibility is, are you able to actually get to that website? Is it easy to find? Navigability is more along the lines of, once you get there, can you navigate around that website and actually find what you need? Speed, of course, how quickly does the page load? Are there large graphics that inhibit you from being able to see it quickly? As far as content, that's just, is the right sort of content there and available for you? visual appeal, does it look professional on your website, or does it look like you gave it to your 14-year-old nephew to design the website? So a little bit more detail on the pre-visit assessment changes that we've made. One of the first questions is we actually provide search terms and ask people to use a search engine such as Google to do a search for that destination using those provided search terms. And of course, these aren't the wording of the questions here, but it's summarized for your convenience. We basically ask them what's the first, second, and third website when they do that Google search or a different search engine search. We ask them, could you find the information, any information about this destination? And we've asked them what was helpful about what they did find about that destination. These items will help sites to be able to evaluate the success of their search engine optimization strategies, if they have one, and also to know if there's other information that maybe another website has out there that they could incorporate into their own website to be helpful. The second question that we ask is we provide a specific website for visitors to the URL to type in and ask them to rate that website, which is our destination that we're working with. We ask them to rate that based on the scale and the questions that you see there. These first few questions deal with accessibility, navigability, and speed. I won't read them all to you. You can do that at a later time when you download the manuals on your own. And then the second part of that question is dealing with the content of the website. Is the right information there? And also the visual appeal. Does it look professional? The third part of the pre-visit assessment is social media. That's become such a hot topic in the last several years. So we wanted to find out, first of all, do our assessors use social media? And if so, which ones do they use? We follow that up with an open-ended question about social media that they have used possibly to plan their visit, if they have done so. Also, we ask about mobile device usage and ask, first of all, do you use a mobile device at all, meaning cell phone or a tablet, something like that? And did you use it to plan your visit? This might be important for the destination to know, simply because a lot of websites aren't necessarily optimized for viewing on a mobile device, and if a lot of people are trying to access them through a mobile device, they may need to do a redesign with that in mind. So skipping ahead, we have our post-visit assessment, and I'll let Doug talk more about the middle part, but the post-visit we match up questions a little bit with our pre-visit to find out if things were as they expected them to be. So did your online research help with the visit? Was the information that you found, did it match what you found when you arrived? Meaning, were the pictures accurate? Was the hours of the facility accurate on the website versus what you found when you got there? All kinds of information could be assessed with that question. Did you access the internet for information during your visit? This is important because some people might be looking for information, but if they couldn't get an internet signal, Wi-Fi signal, couldn't find a place to do that. If it's a dead zone, our destination may need to know that and make some changes there. Also, did you use social media during your visit? And if so, of course, which sites did you use? And followed up with an open-ended question about please describe how you use them. And we kind of left those open-ended questions to be able to give people an opportunity to tell us. We didn't want to make any assumptions here since it is sort of a new area. So we were asking them to just please describe how they used it. And you can see the exact verbiage of the questions when you download the manuals. Like Doug said, they're available on that webinar resource page afterwards. So I think that is the end of the pre and post visit. So I'll turn it back over to Doug.
Yeah, and Robin's done a great job with that component. I certainly don't consider myself to be a social media expert, But obviously that's critical to the destination and tourism experience now, and probably something that you won't find in the manuals from 1990s that Wisconsin developed, because it obviously was more of a print resource back then, and now it's very much online. So again, that speaks to the fact of having well-trained assessors and the right people that are going to be able to put themselves into the shoes of the typical traveler, how they're planning, how they're implementing their trips, so that we get good feedback and a solid report with good findings. I'll speak, also wanted to mention, what I wanted to mention earlier was West Virginia is a very rural state. Very much, a lot of what we're dealing with is still very much in the early phases of the tourism life cycle and the development process. So we find a lot of gaps in the trip planning components, the internet, the social media, those types of things. So those are the types of things we're looking for, but it may be very different from more urban settings. We're very much in a rural developing location, so that does factor into this. I want to mention real briefly our manuals. We have a combination of what we do as more quantitative results and qualitative, and we've talked a fair amount about this and how impactful those findings can be. So this is just an example of a level of attributes that we would evaluate and have more of a quantitative finding with maybe a mean score of their attribute performance that's reported by the assessors. Yeah, there we go. And then more open-ended questions. And we found that you can get a lot more rich content when you have your assessors maybe have more of a chance to record their comments on specific sections of the manual. So we've actually tried to move a little bit more away into more of the open-ended and more qualitative results. And this is an example where we've just provided them with some indicators for hospitality and then asked them to define what they felt was exceptional and what they felt was maybe not performing up to standard. So we've done some experiments with that. So these are the type of things you get to do on a tourism first impression visit. And so when you get down to it, it's a whole lot of fun. You get to eat, you get to zip line, mountain bike, you get to take your family at times and go kayaking and do a lot of the things that we're lucky to live in a place where people can come and do that. And then, obviously provide them some feedback from the beginning to the very end of the experience. So the program is a whole lot of fun. I think anybody that's participated here has had a really good time. And then you get down to where the work really happens, when you get all the information and you get back here to the office and start to compile it. And it can be a very time-consuming process, especially when you have 30 people at a conference that have all contributed some information. So obviously trying to do that in a timely manner and get some feedback to the destination. They're viewing it as a rapid assessment, so they want feedback in a fairly timely manner. And I think we've been able to do that for the most part. Here's some quantitative results, and again, we've talked about maybe how meaningful that is, giving them some feedback in a more of a numeric fashion, as opposed to more of qualitative and open-ended. And we do try to ensure that assessors are providing positive as well as the challenges. So we really want to highlight what they're doing well as what maybe is not performing up to standard and rated at a more of a fair or poor level. So this is an example of how we reported that in the past. Of course, photographs, incorporating them, and maybe some descriptions has worked really well for us, especially when we're giving a presentation or talking about the findings, really focusing on the photos and talking about what the assessors viewed, whether they're coming in or during their assessment. This is an example of what you can do with Qualtrics and with a data export there. Very nice graphs that are already developed for you. So if you take the time to enter the information into Qualtrics, it can make the reporting process quite a bit easier. We found doing a one-page summary works pretty well. So taking the key findings, our reports can be rather substantial and long, especially when you have a lot of assessors visiting a destination. So hitting them first with the key findings really helps to give them a summary and put that in front of their face. Before we turn it over to Cynthia and Laura, we did do an evaluation of our pilot program. So when we did our first 4 assessments, we really wanted to find out if it was having an impact. So we felt strongly that this was a good program to invest time in and continue to evolve. The results overall were very positive, and I'll talk just briefly about some of the findings. really trying to get that low-hanging fruit, some of the things that they may or may not have been aware of, we had hoped they'd be aware of, but with that outsider's perspective and having someone from the outside point those out, finding the things that they could correct in the short term and in the long term. So these are some of the things that they told us that we had helped them to reveal. Are we a pit stop or a destination? Do we want people just to pass through, or do we want them to come and spend multiple days? I think they want to be a destination, but some of our places were struggling with how to really do that and become that. Our short-term improvements were something we were really excited about because we came back 6 months to a year later, and a lot of these things had been done. They'd taken these recommendations and actually improved them by doing things that don't cost a lot of money, putting up some signs, and this is a thing something that I think this program can really do, is to reveal those things that aren't real expensive but can have quite a bit of impact if they improve them. Developing a hospitality training, something as simple as incorporating more menus and things like that. So we felt really encouraged that they were able to do some of these things. You get down to the longer term improvements are more of a challenge, obviously, because they take more money and time. But these are some of the things that they wanted to do after going through the report and listening to the presentation. Incorporating more lodging, striving to make other areas cool. I thought that was an interesting comment. I'm not sure exactly what they meant by that, but they want to be cooler, so that's good. More of the hospitality training, more of the website improvements, so things that we felt confident they were going to continue to strive to accomplish in the long term. So their challenges we asked them about, some of the things they deal with is what's out of their control outside of the destination or the facility, working with local businesses and other employees to get them on board. So some things that we thought we were in a good position to help them with. Obviously, money is always an issue, but getting their board on with them, working with them, and focused on a strategic plan, they felt like the money would come. So we also looked from their comments to see how we could improve and as I mentioned, further develop our programs. Being new to this position, just being here for a few years, it was a great way for me to look at longer term, what additional programs could we develop that would add value to our stakeholders. And I think this program has helped us to do that. And these are some of the things that we've followed up and continued to stay engaged with these destinations. Coming at it through a rapid assessment program and bringing in what you would consider experts. We've had programs that have looked at other stakeholders in the community, doing resident and visitor surveys, and using that information, working with them over a longer term period to develop an action plan for tourism development. And I'm going to give Cynthia a chance here to talk about what they've done in Minnesota, which I think has been more of a holistic approach to this, where it's part of a more robust and a longer term process. Hospitality training is something that we identified as a need, and we've been successful in doing a fair amount of those this year, and that's been identified with this program as well. So it's really helped us to find ways that we can continue to provide value to our tourism destinations and through other programs. Before I turn it over to Cynthia, I just want to mention that there are maybe a unique set of challenges when you're looking at this as a tourism assessment. The cost, obviously, depending on the scope of the assessment, can be not cheap if you're staying overnight, if you want to stay for multiple days, and this is what the destination leadership is requesting. Well, we have to find ways to fund that. Obviously, we can't really justify using our budget to do these on our own, but we've had them provide in-kind services. I wouldn't say that we've made a lot of money off of this program. We'd like to in the future maybe cover more of our expenses, but through the pilot, I think we've been lucky to break even on this. And we're really not sure how we'll continue to evolve it from the cost perspective, but looking for grant funds and other ways to fund this program is something we're currently discussing. The right assessors, I think, is important because that's going to affect what you get out of the report and what they're looking for. What eyes are they looking for? Are they the typical type of traveler or the traveler that's likely to visit the destination? So different age groups, different folks that are inclined to visit a rural destination and know, I think, the same vision that we have for these communities. So this is why we've used university faculty, because we know, who they are and they know this program. I think training peers is obviously a little more intense and certainly possible with this program, and something we've experimented with the conferences. So we're still working on that, and I think it's possible, but maybe a little more challenging at times. The right type of manual, our manual continues to evolve, as I mentioned, with the different types of outcomes in the report. So this is something we're still working on and still evolving, and something we hope to, are glad to share through this webinar and get feedback on and continue to work with this group, because I think it's been a valuable program here in West Virginia that we'll continue to implement. This is a quote that I really love because I think it summarizes the purpose of this program. We're helping to develop sustainable tourism, and this is a program that can help to do that, because tourism can have a lot of impacts in communities, whether good or bad. And we're in a great place, a beautiful state, and I think this program has helped to do that, help them see that, how they can do that in a more sustainable manner. So I'm going to now bring in Cynthia, and just a second while we, which one? Sorry,
well, thank you, Doug. Good morning. This is Cynthia Messer with the University.
Sorry, Cynthia, I just...
Hold on, okay.
I just cut you off. Cynthia, are you still there?
I am here. Can you hear me now, Doug?
Yes, I can. Sorry about that. So I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia Messer with the University of Minnesota Tourism Center. Cynthia has been a great mentor for us and has really provided us. Minnesota has been working in tourism a lot longer than West Virginia, and has really worked with us as we've developed First Impressions and other programs here. So she's going to share some insight into what they've done with this program in Minnesota.
Well, thank you, Doug. I must say it's been a good two-way sharing and learning experience working with Doug and the West Virginia team because of the parallels in our interests and opportunities. We have used the First Impressions program, although we've been very aware of it for many years since Wisconsin formulated it. University of Minnesota Extension had only done one pilot with it in another unit with communities and had not embraced the program for a variety of reasons. But I've always liked it, and so I wanted to find a way to integrate it into our tourism work. And in 2003, we received internal funding with our regional sustainable development partnerships to enter into a 2-year statewide project. This was an opportunity for us to emerge the First Impressions assessment tool and integrate it into this program. So as a little bit of background, the pilot was with 5 communities across the state, all with populations under 1,500 and all in rural settings. In fact, only one community was larger than 1,200. Most were 500 or less, and had, with the exception of 2 communities, had never really embraced tourism to its full potential or even toyed with the idea. So they were coming at this with a very new perspective. We do a tourism assessment program here which has included a visit by an expert team to the community, which is a 2 or 3 day visit to the community, and the community creates a leadership team to do the initial inventory and assessment of what they believe are their tourism assets, and then we go in with the expert team. We saw the First Impressions as an opportunity to create a 360 perspective of the communities by adding in the voice of the visitors. We did not see it as a freestanding tool and do not see going forward with it as a freestanding program, but are definitely integrating it into our tourism assessment program going forward. When we began looking at the programs that are out there, of course, we looked at the Wisconsin program, which was the more comprehensive view of community, and then looked to the West Virginia tourism program as an example, and did model it ultimately on some of the work that Doug and his colleagues in West Virginia had done in targeting the program specifically to tourism. We created a paper tourism assessment tool for the communities to use, because we initially had envisioned it as being an electronic tool in which they could use on tablets. But interestingly, because of the small communities and the volunteers that were going to do it, they asked for paper version rather than electronic. They didn't feel comfortable to go there. So we created it in a paper version. And again, modeling it after the West Virginia, we had the pre-visit, the during the visit into the community, and then the lasting impressions pieces. Wanting to know a little bit of the demographics of the participants who went to visit, but more importantly, as Doug and Robin have talked about, the importance of looking at how visitors find information about a community before they go. So we had, similar to West Virginia, we asked those individuals that were going to be visiting communities to go out and look at the various websites that provided information about the community. Again, most of those small communities did not necessarily have a Convention and Visitor Bureau site. They may have been going just to the municipal site or even to private sector sites to understand how the community was being promoted and what images were being put forward. During the visit, they collected information, and again, as Doug mentioned, the importance of the photographs was essential, and that actually turned out to be some of the highlights for the community members participating in it. Because of the size of the communities, they were a little less mystery guests than anticipated. They were fairly recognized as, well, those are probably the people doing the first impressions from the community's visits, but it did not impede their ability to provide objective feedback, and that was what we were looking for. The way we framed it with 5 communities in the statewide project is we had each community visit one of the other communities of the 5 communities, and so we assigned them which community they would visit. The community leadership team that was working on this project was responsible for identifying who would participate on the community visitation team, and that became one of the larger challenges, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we did not have large teams. They were basically one small party of 4 or less that visited one of the other communities. It was simply to give an idea of visitors' perspective. It was not intended as a more comprehensive rapid assessment. What we were trying to do is pair the visitor impressions with those of the community of their own assets, and then with the expert team coming in post first impressions visit to use some of the same questions to then go in and look at the community. Like the West Virginia program, we provided a written report, but our report was on the entire project. So it included the community's self-assessment, the first impressions view, and the expert views of the community, all integrated, and the reports end up being about 50 pages in length. They're quite lengthy. And we provided lists of recommendations of ideas that they could do for short-term and long-term improvement, and then we used those lists. Our educators in each region who were participating on the project facilitated the discussion in the community about their response to the ideas put forward in the report, and they then identified at least one short-term and one long-term action to begin working on. Because of the 2-year commitment of the relationship in these communities, we're able then to encourage them during the action planning stage, and I think that this is really important. I think the First Impressions tool is of itself a realistic piece of information, and while we provided in some instances mean scores, as Doug said, they like seeing some of the quantitative numbers. It is primarily for us a qualitative tool because the number of visitors, you cannot really do significant quantitative data. And what we found is the two communities that had more tourism experience than the others, for them, this was the portion of the project that they really wanted to get. And our cautionary note to them was, you cannot use that information for decision making because it does not fully represent all of your different audiences, and it's such a small sampling. So that was our cautionary note. In terms of adding to what Doug was saying, I think it's really important as to who participates on these teams. We wanted the peer-to-peer perspective, so that's what we were using the tool to obtain. But we also then married it with the expert team visit using similar questions, so we were able to do some internal comparative, but we did not frame it in our reports that way. I think one of the most interesting outcomes for us was not necessarily just the findings of the information that this particular project, First Impressions piece, gave to the project, but it was what we have learned through our midterm evaluations and now in our follow-up of this project using ripple effect mapping, was the social capital aspect of this. The community members rated the First Impressions portion of the project very highly. They loved being able to go and see how other communities are doing tourism. And the comments that we received is it gave them a different view of their own community and the opportunities that they have. So it created a lot of optimism, was the word that they used. And I think that that is a huge opportunity for this. I think the opportunity, as Doug mentioned, the assessors, if you know who some of the niche markets are for a particular community, it probably makes sense to try and select first impression visitors that reflect those niche markets. And I wholeheartedly agree with the idea of the multi-generational. We were really adamant about trying to include not only representatives of the different generations, but to get youth involved, and that created a bit of a challenge with scheduling. One of the interesting suggestions that's been made, and going forward we're going to look at, one, we are moving to a Qualtrics version document into electronic because it will, as Doug shared in his piece, enable us to do some very nice reporting information, but also we think that that's the future, is going to the electronic again for obvious reasons. We'll still maintain the paper version if it is needed in smaller communities, but we think that the Qualtrics will really be the key. The other piece is, one suggestion that was made is to have the visitors complete this, do a pre and post piece with this. I'm still reflecting on what that might look like and if the information would be significantly different. If they haven't been to a community, how can they really assess it? It would be based on incomplete information or what they find online. And that goes to the piece that Robin was talking about, is the information that is done with that online information. So I think that's an opportunity for us. The other piece is cost, and I really appreciate Doug's candor with that, because that is part of what we do. We charge for our programs, and our first impressions piece being added to our tourism assessment, because we do a 12 to 18 month engagement, we are having to cover multiple costs in that, and so we charge initially, without first impressions, our tourism assessment program is a $3,500 cost to communities. With the first impressions and some of the additional enhancements to that, we're looking in the $7,000 range. And interestingly, the communities are not balking at that. They understand that the costs are associated with covering real costs and time to cover participants' engagement. So that's a real highlight. I didn't want to take away from Doug. I appreciate your including me on this, and I think I'll leave it there and just let us move on to the other presenters and/or dialogue.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. I think we'll save questions for the end, and we can answer questions for any of the presenters. We do have Laura Brown with us today from Connecticut, and so our last presentation is going to be about neighborhood impressions, which Laura has been instrumental in implementing in Connecticut.
Unmuted.
I think it's a little bit of
Hi, everyone.
We have Laura still with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of it.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit of it.
I think you're good, Laura.
Okay. Well, I'll just take a few minutes to talk about another version of the program that we adopted in Wisconsin. And, it's so exciting to hear about all the various versions of the program and ways that it's been adapted in different states to meet the local community needs. And I think that's really one of the benefits of this program, is that it is so adaptable and can be used for a lot of different end purposes, but also contribute to a lot of different existing programs that you might already have in place. So the community and neighborhood impressions is actually one single tool that was developed as an extension of the original Community First Impressions program. So again, this is a little different than the models that we've been hearing about today, but really an adaptation of the original model, which was the community swap type model, where there's two communities that agree to do the first impressions together and create visit teams that then visit the other community. But the tool is, like I said, really adaptable. The original Community First Impressions manual was intended for a medium-sized community. Again, this was created in Wisconsin, so it was probably created for a community of 10,000 people, 15,000 people. And we found that there were a lot of those small communities, like Cynthia was mentioning, that were 500 people or 700 people that wanted to use the First Impressions program, but found it a little bit overwhelming because there were so many questions that didn't seem relevant to a very small community. So we took that original manual, this was in 2014, and pared it down significantly, including some of the most relevant questions for small communities. What we found when we did that was that these were also the same types of questions that would be relevant for a neighborhood. So the idea is that the questions, the geographic scope of the questions in this manual would be walkable in about a 3-hour period. So you can see on your screen now some of the differences, and I know that the font is really small here, so I don't expect you to be able to necessarily read all those. But the neighborhood version is significantly pared down from the community version. And what I wanted to mention briefly too is that during that revision process, the community version of the Wisconsin manual was revised to include a number of other elements that incorporated more for downtowns, Main Street, and tourism, because as we're seeing from these other two manuals that we've heard about today, a lot of communities have become more interested in tourism development. And so the community version of the Wisconsin manual includes significantly more questions about tourism development, about sustainability, food systems development, and technology infrastructure. Also incorporating some questions about changing demographics in a lot of our communities, including young people and elements that would respond to changes for an aging population. So I just wanted to give you an example here of how the neighborhood version was a little different than the community version. And we can go to the next slide. So just to clarify, the neighborhood and small communities version is the same manual in Wisconsin. And we'll be talking a little bit more about how to use this manual in the next webinar, because we will be talking about additional adaptations for youth and millennials, urban neighborhoods, and then and main streets also. So it'll be a little bit more of an urban focus during that webinar. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about this program and hear from all of you.
Great, thanks, Laura. Okay, so I just wanted to mention a couple things in what Cynthia and Laura had said. We have had, talking about the funding perspective, we have tried to incorporate some version of first impressions, and I think what Laura mentioned about it being so adaptable, at times maybe we won't use the whole manual. We'll find categories that fit with a certain audience. When we're working with 30 people at a conference, they're probably not going to take the time to fill out the complete manual. Some may not. So it is really adaptable, and you kind of have to think about your particular needs in that particular instance. But tying it into maybe a larger term planning process where you can maybe get a grant, or the community is willing to pay a $7,000 to $10,000 to create a tourism action plan, and a first impression can be part of that. And that is something that we have done in the past. So lumping it into a larger term process can be a way to maybe get it funded. But with that, I will open it to questions. I think we have a few in the chat box. Is that right, Robin?
Yeah, there's at least one here in the chat box that says, it asks if we have any materials or curriculum developed already to train the assessment team on sustainable tourism concepts or best practices.
Well, I'll take a first crack at that. That's really what I've tried to do with the manual, is to use it as an educational tool as well as to what the indicators of sustainable tourism development should be. So primarily with our training, of course, as I mentioned, Ritchie and Crouch's book on the sustainable competitive destination is a great reference for me. But condensing those materials, the challenge is you don't have a whole lot of time. The assessors, and to be honest with you, we haven't spent a whole lot of time training assessors because we've used more of the expert approach that Cynthia mentioned in using university faculty here. So I have worked with Main Street directors, and I'm going to try to continue to work with them because I see them as both a peer but also an expert, because they work day to day in developing their downtown areas, and they're very interested in, and as Cynthia said, the experience you get from going to another community that can help them and what they can share with other communities. So that's certainly still evolving, and I don't know if Cynthia or Laura have something to add to that.
I'll have to unmute you just a minute, please.
Oops. Do all. Try
Okay.
that. We can't. Can we?
Muted.
We can't hear everyone.
This is Cynthia. We don't train the assessors or the community visitors specifically on tourism or sustainable tourism concepts and best practices. Because what we find is they're going to look at the community basically for their own reasons, and we do talk about these things with the community leadership team, but because we're encouraging the leadership team to reach into the community and engage other participants, they don't necessarily get that very specific training. The training that we recognize we probably need to strengthen a little bit is for those that are going to do the visitation. I think going forward we will do a little stronger training with them in general about using the tool, things to look for, rather than focusing on the sustainable tourism concepts and practices. I think we keep that focused more to the leadership team.
Muted.
Oh. Technical check. I think that's a big challenge. You want to make sure you're getting value for your time and for the folks that are there, and I think there is an opportunity to do it in a peer exchange format, but training the assessors and making sure they're looking for what you want them to look for. Yeah, it's something that we're still working on. I think it is a challenge, and so, like I said, we've used our manual and some other training materials, but I think it's maybe a little more intense with this version than with just the general kind of community walkthrough. So do we have a next?
Laura has something to add. Just to clarify, in Minnesota, you have a leadership team comprised of community people that also do visit, in addition to the expert team. I'll ask that question of Cynthia.
This is Cynthia. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The community leadership team is responsible for coordinating the entire community side of the project. They can elect to be part of the community first impressions visitation team, or they can recruit others in the community to do that. But in the pilot, we found that in each community, at least one or two of the leadership team participated. But in a couple of instances, they were very intentional about recruiting non-leadership team participants from the community, and that really helped extend the awareness and engagement within their own community.
I think maybe they're wondering about the expert component of your process. Are they using a first impression manual, or how are the experts doing their evaluation, Cynthia?
Great question. I create the expert team drawing from what the community has identified as their assets. We put together an expert team of usually 4 to 6 people, including university faculty, the regional manager from our state tourism office participates, and then we may pull someone in from Department of Natural Resources or other areas of expertise if we know they have a strong natural resource base or whatever. There's components of the first impression manual, but not the entire thing. My directions to them use some of those key questions to guide them, but because they're experts in tourism, I give them much more open-ended perspective. We then, because we do a 2-day visit, and during that visit we do community interviews, we do a community meeting in which we conduct a SWOT. We do a debrief at the end of our visit with the experts, and then they are asked to write a 3 to 5 page summary of their thoughts, in addition to the notes, submitting the notes that they took during the visit. And they usually are, interestingly, without the tourism assessment, first impressions assessment, they actually address some of those key elements on their own.
Yeah, I would just mention some of the key components that sort of seem to repeat themselves, which is probably no surprise. The gateway, the entrances, hospitality is obviously a key component with tourism. And as I mentioned, us being in a rural location, so of the attractions, the linkages between the attractions, um, the amount of certain services in certain locations. So, there are some, well, we have, I think, a pretty comprehensive manual. You identify those key components that are probably going to reoccur each time. I think we have, are there any questions in the chat box?
That was it for questions.
I think we have Norm Schwartberger. Norm, are you on here? Well, he is one of our community agents in the Northern Panhandle where we did an assessment. I asked him to speak to that one in particular, but I don't think he's on it. So do we have any additional questions?
I can unmute everybody to speak unless we have audio problems. So.
If anyone's still participating that has a question, ask it. Well, ours. The slide we have up now has the resources that I mentioned in the webinar. All of the reports and the manuals that we've created are posted on our webinar resources page. And also some of the manuals from the early days in Ohio are there, so you're welcome to download and look through our manual, those reports, the different versions, the formats of our reports.
Hey, Doug, I got a question real quick.
Sure, Andy.
This is Andy from Michigan State University. Sorry, I'm losing my headset here. And maybe I've posed this before, but if, MSU, we have a small tourism team that's looking to bring this to Michigan, as most of you know on the phone call. And what do you think would be the first step, or the first or second step to really getting this program off the ground? Granted, let's say you've got a team of 3 or 4 people willing to see this come to fruition. What would be the first step outside of the grant that most of us are on to implementing this in the state?
Well, from my perspective, we found a couple of destinations that I had been pretty involved with, and I basically just presented to them. I went to this with them and asked if they would be able to comp our visit, and that was enough for us to go ahead and give this a shot. So we just needed a manual at that point of what we're going to look for. And so we took some time, basically looked at our community manual and decided what else we needed to look at specifically within a destination. So from our perspective, it was covering our costs. Like I said, we didn't make any money, but we asked them if they could, and these were CVBs initially. So, a lot of times they'll bring in a mystery shopper. A lot of them do that. And this is a very similar program. So if they were able to see us as cover our expenses, and then we, assembled our team here at the university. I guess it would depend whether you just wanted to use a team within your department, or if you wanted to try to do a community exchange. Obviously, that would take a little more planning, and maybe Cynthia can speak to that. But we started with university faculty for ours. So all we really need to do is cover our costs.
And I noticed Laura has commented here in the chat box. Poor Laura, I have to keep muting her. It says that they're starting with a pilot in Connecticut this summer. Laura, I can unmute you. I think it's okay as long as we're not speaking at the same time. So if you'd like to say more about it, I can unmute you.
Muted.
Okay, you're
Sure,
good.
can you guys hear me?
Okay, you're good.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? So yeah, I mean,
Yes.
Andy, what we're doing,
Yes.
what we're doing in Connecticut is just starting with a pilot, and that's the first steps have really been to get out and talk with communities about the program because none of them have ever heard of it. So, you know, I'm working with the Connecticut Main Street program, and I think Susan West is probably still on this webinar. And they've got a lot of existing connections with communities that may have an interest. So having that that sort of, you know, communities that might already have some infrastructure in place to do something like this or have a need for it would be those were the first communities that we went to, and then sort of pitched the idea and did some education, you know, one-on-one education with community leaders in those communities to find out who might be a good fit. So we have a commitment now, just this morning actually, between 2 communities that are going to do the swap this summer. And I'm also going to be piloting the neighborhood version with 2 urban communities, and that's not as far along, but coming together. So the hope is to document how that goes and then start to create some materials that are specific to Connecticut. I really like what I've heard today in terms of the integration of an expert model and a community-based model, and I think that could help to address some of the more specific needs that come up in communities. Like, for instance, we've heard a lot of them talk about housing, like they need to know some best practices around multi-use housing and retail. And so, you know, maybe that's a way to kind of address some more specific concerns that the communities have. Anyway, that was long-winded, but that's how we're starting in Connecticut.
And how are you going to fund that? For expert.
Sorry, say that again?
I was just wondering how you were going to fund funding for that.
Well, you know, my involvement is already paid for. I'm a state employee, so I don't need to raise funds for my salary for my involvement. We don't have right now because, you know, we're not asking a lot of other faculty members to participate. I do have some classes involved, but the funds, I mean, it's mainly been like printing of materials. And then, you know, we'll ask the communities to come up for some funding for food, but we haven't really incurred any other costs, to be honest.
So one of our, if we're going to take people from and ask them to assess another community, we feel like we need to at least cover their travel expenses. And
yes. Doug, what, can you restate what you just said? You were bouncing in and out of there. I think you said something about asking communities to visit other communities.
Yeah, we would need to cover their expenses, we feel, and that's easier for us to do if it's university faculty than if we're trying to pay for someone's travel expenses to go from one community to another, and they're staying overnight, and they're eating, and they're going to do activities. So we have to figure out how we're going to do that.
This is Daniel. I would say that's a challenge with the community model too that we run into. Is, you know, like Doug said, we feel like we need to we're going to ask these people to help us with the work, and we kind of need to cover at least a portion of it. And it's, unless they, you know, apply to be vendors with the university, it becomes a challenge for us to reimburse those costs.
This is Cynthia. We addressed that in this pilot because we did ask community members to visit one of the other communities, and because they were located all over the state, the distances were significant that in several instances they did need to overnight. We had to do a lot of financial calculations to figure out the per diems that we could allow within the grant funds, but more importantly, what would the mileage costs be? And what we did is we, for each community, said we would cover one vehicle round trip to that place, and we figured out the mileage and estimated costs, and up to 2 rooms, because we figured male, female, they could share, but up to 2 rooms. So we had to do a lot of advanced budget calculations and estimating, and I think that that's really important. That's why I would say, in terms of piloting, I would back it up and say your team needs to decide which approach you want to take with a pilot, and face some of those challenges of how will it be funded. That's why I shared with you the costs that we are now charging, is because we do try and cover all of those costs. It's not salaries, it's the travel expenses for multiple visits to the community as well as community visits, etc., for them to do it. But the community members find such value in that exchange that I would encourage you to consider that, if at all possible.
So Cynthia, just to clarify, you've come up with a dollar figure of $7,000 to cover the experts. Obviously, the community self-assessment probably doesn't have many costs associated with it, but the visitors from another community, you came up with a lump sum that's going to cover all.
Right. Right. It's a complex estimate, if you will, but for the community visits, you figure out where they might be traveling and come up with a per diem allowance for the communities. If you want them to embrace some of the activities, for example, as Doug said in West Virginia, things like kayaking, whitewater rafting, or zip lining, you have to account for that, because then it becomes a little more challenging within the university to ask for that to be covered in advance, but you can give them the money so that they can then in fact look like tourists. And I think that that's real asset. We, for our expert team, because we also use non-university folks, we do not pay them a stipend or an honorarium, but we do cover their expenses. And we ask for the community visit, we ask the community to provide in-kind, both for lodging and food, as well as the meeting space.
So that's a prerequisite for them to be approved for the program, that they're able to provide in-kind lodging and food to the team?
Yes. Yes, we give, when we're in negotiations with communities for the program, we spell out what they can expect from the university, what they can expect for themselves, what are their roles. We have comprehensive information for them about, here's the role of the leaders, here's the estimated amount of time you can anticipate spending on this project per week, here's who we need to be involved, and we're asking them to tap resources across the community to be involved. So we're pretty explicit with them at the front end, and that I have found has been very helpful.
Cynthia, is that something you have, is that like a written memorandum of agreement?
It ends up, when we sit down with them in the conversation phase, when they're making the decision, that then becomes an addendum to their program fee agreement, yes.
I don't know if that's something you're able or willing to share, but that for people who are starting out, being able to see some of that might be helpful. So.
Sure, I would be happy to share that.
Great, thank you.
Laura has a couple of other comments here, but she has muted herself, so I cannot unmute you. Laura, so she says they also
muted.
Oh, there she is.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say that we have a similar MOA, it sounds like, to what Cynthia's created. Again, our program is not the tourism program, so that I think that creates some additional challenges in terms of like how to get those activities funded that you're doing while you're on the tourism assessment. But we have been asking the pilot communities to come up with, if the teams need to have lunch during that visit, or to provide space for the presentations. We ask them to provide all of that in kind as part of their partnership with us.
So just to clarify, you don't activities to become. That is.
Could you repeat that, please?
Or muted herself, so you should be good.
So you get, Cynthia, you get food and lodging comp, but you don't ask for activities to be comped. That's something you're willing to pay for, because obviously you'd have to have some control over that. You know, going to, I don't know what, but you know, activities can be expensive.
Right. In the communities that our people have visited, because they were so small, there were not a lot of activities for them to engage in.
Okay.
Going forward, if we were to do it with larger or tourism-based communities, I think that would have to be considered in those expenses. If we want them to engage in tourism activities, I think we would then want to cover those costs, at least for engaging in one activity, and allow them, you know, up to $40 or whatever that cost might be.
And part of the challenge with getting them comped, because I would think the business or the attraction manager would be willing to comp, but if you're comped, it's kind of obvious that you're there for a particular.
Precisely.
Right? So you want to try to avoid that in order to be a true first impression.
Exactly. And that's where, as much as we know that the community is willing to do the comp, unless they have either a gift certificate that they could provide, that might be an option, or chamber bucks, or something of that nature that allows that mask of quasi-invisibility for the visitor.
Right.
You need to figure out a way to cover the cost of it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, communities, small communities may have various schemes like that that enable you to provide it somewhat anonymously.
Yeah, and when we worked with our Convention and Visitor Bureau directors, they were fairly easily able to either pay for that activity themselves out of their budget or get it comped. So they're a great partner.
Right.
That might be where I would start first if I were one of you guys.
Exactly. If we know that it's a community that's large enough to have a CVB or chamber that we are working with, we would ask them how they could cover that cost. Definitely.
And if they're not large enough, then they probably don't have that many activities.
Right.
Does that help you guys out?
This is Laura. I have one more question about the tourism destinations survey, and if we need to wrap this up, I can ask this offline if that's easier.
Go ahead.
So I guess I'm wondering, you know, with the results of that kind of assessment, you're going into like a specific business or location. Are the results mainly provided back to that individual business, or do they go to the community? And I guess a follow-up is if they do go to the business, what is the incentive for the business to get a review like this versus just going right to their customers?
So if it's an individual business, I think that's a good question. You know, I think it's a different level of feedback. I guess it's similar to the feedback they would get from their visitor. Speak to that. Oh, that's a good question. What would make it different from just general feedback they would get from a random visitor? Maybe it's a little more robust. Maybe it's a little more comprehensive, and it's more intentional.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I think that's a good word. I think intentional and structured. I mean, there's specific things that we're saying, hey, we really want you to look at this. And yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where you are and what you're doing. So, I mean, you know, if you're doing a specific facility, you know, you get the expert kind of opinion. If you're doing an attraction within a destination, I mean, I think like folks, I mean, you are providing that visitor feedback, again, it's intentional and it's structured, so you know that that specific things are going to be addressed.
Yeah, and when we went through this county park, which is kind of more of a state park or a resort, he wanted a group of people there at the same time to go and do a number of different activities. And the way this came about was our extension agent in that part of the state. We were planning our unit retreat, and so this was provided complimentary in exchange. So we basically bartered for our retreat space. And so we had our retreat for a few days, and then we did our assessment for a couple days. And it seems like everybody went out. So they complimented all the activities at the resort and the space for our retreat. We didn't have to pay for that. And we did our assessment and provided a report. But it seems like in that case, if it is more of a resort type of an attraction, having people there at one time doing different activities and providing specific feedback at that one point in time was valuable for him. And he knew that he was going to his board trying to get them to listen to him, and they weren't listening to him. So he felt that if this came from us, they would listen, and they did. So that was cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a level of legitimacy, and it's a level of legitimacy that the teacher has some. And it would be the same thing with the CVB, I think. When we talked to them, they had certain challenges that they knew that they had in their mind that they maybe wanted to justify or get an outside perspective on, or validate them, or maybe point them in a different direction, make them look at something else. So that's sometimes how this comes about.
Well, and I would also say that I think when we worked with the CVB, I mean the specific places that we went, I mean they said, yeah, we want, we understand how this program is going to work, and we want that feedback. So I mean, I think the individual attractions saw the value in it also.
And so the CVBs are in large part dictated by their board what they can or cannot do. And that is challenging a lot of times for CVB directors. So bringing us in, having come and visited their destination, telling them what we saw or didn't see, most of the time we're solely focused on advertising, so helping them to understand some management practices that they may or may not be aware of, or maybe largely ignoring, and getting their board to think about that and allowing them to justify using some of their time or resources on some of these issues. Because a lot of times, otherwise, again, we're in a very rural state, so they don't have a lot of money, and they're telling them to just go spend it all on advertising, not knowing what the impact of it is, and a lot of different management practices. So I think it really helps them, and it helps them to justify things with their board that they would have a hard time doing on their own. Any other
We have about
thoughts?
5 minutes left, if anyone has any final questions.
So it sounds like Minnesota and Connecticut are considering doing some type of tourism version pilot in the near future. What did I say?
Michigan is as well.
I mean, not Michigan. I'm sorry, Andy. Michigan and Connecticut.
Yeah, I don't really. Our original timeline before we got involved with the grant together was to do it at the end of this year. But I think with these trainings, we've pushed our pilot back probably till early spring or late winter, probably 1st of 2016.
Okay. So I'm wondering if Lisa has any thoughts, because we'll be going to Vermont in September after you heard this about that actual trip.
Hi. Yeah, I'm just like a big sponge sitting here absorbing it all. And, trying to think about how this comes together for our training in Vermont. One big difference is, especially listening to Cynthia talk about Minnesota, it sounds like there's a lot of value in having communities doing the assessments. I guess there are different models. So, it'll be interesting to experience it for ourselves as extensions, professionals, and then think about how we can make it work with the community exchange model or other ways of making it work.
So I guess when
Do you have anything? Sorry, I was going to say, did you have anything more specific or just a general check-in?
Yeah, because I think when our intention of going to Vermont in the fall as part of this grant would be from the expert perspective when we do that assessment. We hadn't intended to incorporate a community exchange. Am I correct in saying that?
More of a teaching.
More of a teaching piece, but we would actually just be looking at considering ourselves experts and looking at it through that lens.
Right, my understanding is, we're sort of the extension expert, giving them feedback in Vermont, as opposed to the community exchange piece isn't happening, which, I think is still going to be really valuable. Although listening to how things worked in Minnesota, I couldn't help but wonder how much of the value comes from, just the feedback given and received versus having the community members experience another community for themselves.
Yeah, I think it's maybe more of a one-way exchange with the experts visiting a community, as opposed to the information sharing kind of going both ways, taken back to the participating community from what they see, sharing their insights, but also learning about what they could do in their own community, which I think is pretty a great aspect.
This is Cynthia. That's what the community people indicated was perhaps the greatest benefit of this for them, was their own learning about themselves and ideas for their own community. And in some instances, they said they came back with a much greater appreciation of their own community and were very optimistic about their future for tourism because they got to go see someone else. So I think it was that intentionality of visiting another community as opposed to just going on vacation. They were very intentional in the learning aspect of that.
While you're answering that question, Cynthia, how do you think that would have compared if, sort of experts had come in and given them feedback on their community, because they still got feedback? How valuable is that feedback as well, just sort of on its own without also the experience of visiting another community?
Oh, I do think there's value in the expert perspective, and certainly that's where the tourism assessment program has been prior to this pilot and integrating first impressions, and we still offer that up. Many communities want that. I struggle with it because for me, the work in communities is about that self-development, that awareness and building of the community capacity. So if we can, from my perspective here in Minnesota, if we use only the expert model, then we're reinforcing that as opposed to helping to build community capacity. And so that was an important decision for us. But I think there is still value. Depends on the community and their needs. They may need one or both.
Yeah.
That makes sense. It sounds like they can really complement each other. And,
yes.
In Vermont, when we'll be doing the training and presenting the expert model, certainly one of the things we can talk about is the potential for the community exchange model.
Yes, and I don't know what the agenda is during the time that you're there, but it might be an opportunity to create two communities that you could do just a fast exchange and have listen to the community members to what they felt was advantageous.
Yep.
as part of your learning.
Yeah, it's something to think about. I mean, we're working. Oh, I think I have an echo. We're working with a relatively large town compared to, it sounds like the other towns that were presented. But yes, it's definitely something to consider as we move forward and develop the agenda and itinerary, which we're still not that far along with.
Well,
this has all been really helpful. Thank you.
We'd love to have you with us.
One thing I just,
Yeah,
oh, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to add in terms of our, can you guys hear me? I'm sorry about the echo. I think there's an echo when I talk. I just wanted to add, Lisa, that one thing we're considering as we pilot this in Connecticut is that these pieces don't have to all happen at the same time. As in, if I'm thinking about the different pieces of Cynthia's program in Minnesota, those could be all pieces of a program that we do with two particular communities, and maybe there's, one sort of expert type visit that happens in addition to a community swap, but they don't have to happen during the same month or even right away. So they could all be different pieces of a longer term program in working with those communities, and maybe there are other elements of it that would develop that would contribute to their, serve their particular needs in Brattleboro or whatever communities we work with there.
And that's a good point. Remember, Minnesota, it's a longer term engagement. We had 18 to 24 months, and going forward, we'll be doing it probably in about 12 months. So that's a very good observation.
Yeah, no, those are good points. And one thing that we need to remember in Vermont is, while I'm very focused on making sure there's, some benefit and valuable sort of expert feedback for the community we'll be working on, the primary goal of this is an extension training. So we have to, make sure that
stays
foremost on our mind as we're developing the agenda.
Yeah, I don't
Good point.
be so focused at doing the assessment while we're there, but making sure everybody understands how they're going to approach it in their state, how they want to structure it, and working that out. If it's going to be mostly a community exchange, then we need to work together to figure out how to most effectively do that. And I think that would be valuable time together and figuring all those things out.
Yeah, this is Daniel. I think this is this initial piece is kind of training people who aren't as familiar with the program on how it works, and then again we budgeted money so that people can have some monetary resources to conduct a future assessment, and you're going to have the WVU folks there who do a very expert-based approach, and you're going to have people like Laura there who is big on the peer-to-peer piece. So you're going to be able to get both those opinions and hear about what kind of best practices for both of them, and then decide which one's going to be best for where you are and how you want to implement it going forward.
And I have to say that I have been focused on working with the Main Street organization, and I think you all have Main Street communities. And so in West Virginia, they have a conference twice a year, and it's run by our development office, and they have a budget for their trainings, and they're able to cover the costs. So they're actually interested in, that would be more of a community-to-community exchange, because each of the Main Street directors come to the conference. It's always in the Main Street community. They're all there. It's a candid audience, and we're able to walk them through how to conduct a first impression, actually do that as part of the conference. Then they get to talk about what they saw, what's happening in their community. So it really is that exchange. And that might be an organization that you want to look for, because I think it's going to be a good relationship we're establishing here.
Well, if we don't have anything else, we said we'd finish up around 11:30, and it's a little bit after. So, if there are any other questions, definitely get in contact with Doug or Robin or Cynthia, and make sure they get answered. And I know Robin will be getting everything up on the website. I think a lot of things are already up there. But we'll get this webinar up, and again, just remember the upcoming dates, July 23rd and August 19th for our next two webinars. And just because I forgot this, the code does change, so keep your eyes open for the call-in number and code for the upcoming webinars. We'll get those out a couple days before everything happens. So there's,
I think Cynthia had mentioned some additional resources that she might be willing to share. The webinar site with the resources is not a public site, is that right, Robin? You have to have the link. You can't find it on our website.
Yeah, it's a hidden page, but if you have the link, you can access it, no problem.
So there were certain resources on there I didn't really want to make available to the general public or be that easy to find. So we are kind of just sharing that within our community right now. Well, we will see you all on the 23rd, I hope.
all right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you all.
Excellent. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.